I can still hear the screams on the radio. 5 soldiers from our own unit calling for help as the artillery rained down on their grid. Friendly fire has killed up to 17 out of every 100 casualties in wars like Desert Storm. And beneath their screams, I can hear the actual cause of their deaths. An admiral, shouting in a blind panic, ordering the strike battery to fire even after I gave him clear, recorded warnings that the coordinates were blue on blue. I was the communications officer. I did my job perfectly. But when the dust settled, the admiral realized his panic had cost 5 lives. Rather than face a court-martial, he turned to the oldest trick in the military playbook. Blame the junior officer. He picked me on purpose. I was a junior female officer on the comms deck, alone, without a big network of academy friends to protect me. Today, we look at what happens when an admiral hides his deadly mistake behind top-secret codes, and how one woman with cold discipline turned an absolute cover-up into a trap. Within 24 hours, my access badges were taken away. The audio recordings, the proof of his cowardice, and my skill were sealed under top-secret SCI classification. I was officially charged with gross negligence. The prosecuting attorneys smiled at me, sure that I would easily break. They thought my quiet manner meant I was terrified. They confused my discipline for weakness. They thought they had found an easy person to blame, so the Navy's reputation would stay clean. But I refused to let 5 good soldiers be buried under a lie. The morning after the incident, I tried to log into my terminal. A bold red banner flashed across the screen. Classified, top secret, SCI, no access. Over my own work files. The same files I had created less than 24 hours earlier. The same recordings where my voice is calm, professional, warning him 3 separate times that the grid coordinates matched our own unit's position. The system had simply erased my access to my own reality. That is when I understood the full scope of what he was doing. This was not just about protecting his career. This was about rewriting history itself. And the military digital access logs would show that the lockout came from his office, signed with his code at 0600 hours, before I had even been told about any investigation. The speed of it was the tell. In a normal investigation, evidence gets saved, not buried. Witnesses get interviewed, not silenced. But within the first 72 hours, every person who had been in that comm center with me was moved, scattered to different ships, different bases, different time zones. The junior ratings who had been sitting right next to me, who had heard the same transmissions, who had watched me follow protocol to the letter, were suddenly out of reach. And the official incident report, the one that would be used in my court-martial, listed me as the only communications officer on duty that night. That was a lie. There were 4 of us in that room. But if the report says I was alone, then there are no witnesses to contradict his version of events. Internal whispers suggested the Admiral had picked me because I had no political connections to fight back. I was not an academy graduate. I did not come from a military family. I did not have a mentor with stars on his shoulders who could make a phone call and get the charges dropped. The Admiral knew all of this. He had access to my personnel file. He knew I was vulnerable. And he knew that in the military, how things look often matters more than truth. A junior female officer with no powerful allies, accused of a terrible mistake, facing a closed court-martial where the key evidence is classified above her clearance level. The system was built to crush me, and he was counting on that design to work. The prosecuting attorneys laid it out for me in a private meeting. They told me the court-martial was a formality. They told me the evidence against me was overwhelming. They offered me a deal. Plead guilty to negligence, accept a dishonorable discharge, and avoid prison time. They made it sound reasonable. They made it sound like mercy. But I read between the lines. They needed me to confess. Because without my confession, their case was built entirely on classified evidence that I could not challenge. And if I refused to plead, if I forced them to go to trial, there was a chance, however small, that someone would start asking why a junior officer with a spotless record would suddenly make a mistake that killed 5 people. There was a chance someone would demand to hear the actual recordings, and that was a risk the Admiral could not afford. I refused the deal. The lead attorney looked at me like I had just signed my own death warrant. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me I would regret it. He told me the court would show no mercy to someone who refused to take responsibility. But I was not refusing responsibility. I was refusing to take responsibility for someone else's cowardice. There is a difference. And I was willing to bet everything that the families of those 5 soldiers would understand that difference once they heard the truth. If you have ever watched someone in power lie to protect themselves, if you have ever been blamed for something you did not do, stay with me. Because what happened next proves that discipline and timing can tear down even the most carefully built cover-up. And if this kind of story matters to you, think about subscribing, because we cover cases like this where the system protects the wrong person and someone has to fight back with nothing but proof and nerve. I mapped out the base's internal server setup. The classified recordings were stored on a secure server, only reachable through terminals with the right clearance credentials. I did not have those credentials, but I knew someone who did, the Admiral himself. And I knew that copied credentials were accessible through a secure terminal if you had the technical knowledge and the nerve to use it. I studied the shift changes. I memorized the blind spots in the surveillance grid. I waited for the one night each week when the security office ran its system checks, and the camera feeds were routed through a backup server that had a 4-minute delay. I accessed a terminal in a maintenance corridor that most officers did not even know existed. It took exactly 3 minutes of perfectly controlled nerves. My hands did not shake. My breathing stayed even. I cloned the credentials onto a small drive, logged out, wiped the access history, and walked back to my quarters at a normal pace. If anyone had stopped me, if anyone had asked what I was doing in that corridor, I had a prepared answer. But no one stopped me, because I looked like I belonged there. That is the thing about discipline. It makes you invisible. People see the uniform, the posture, the calm expression, and they assume you have permission to be wherever you are. The next morning was the mass funeral. The chapel was packed with grieving spouses, parents, and older siblings. The Admiral stood at the pulpit in his pristine white uniform, his chest covered in medals. He spoke of bravery. He spoke of the fog of war. He spoke of tragic mistakes that no one could have predicted. He looked directly at the grieving mothers and lied to their faces. He said that every decision that night had been made with the best information available. He said that the military had done a thorough investigation. He said that accountability would be served. And then he looked in my direction, just for a moment, and I saw the faint trace of a smile. I stood in the back of the chapel, near the audio control panel. I had studied the layout during the rehearsal the day before. I knew which port connected to the primary PA system. I knew which bypass would override the podium microphone. I waited until the Admiral was halfway through his speech, until the moment when he was describing the soldiers as heroes who had died in service to their country. And then, I plugged the clone drive into the panel and keyed the microphone bypass. The chapel's massive PA system crackled to life. I did not say a word. I simply pressed play. The audio of the strike filled the room. First my voice, calm, measured, professional. Admiral, Those coordinates match Bravo Unit's current position. Recommend immediate hold on fire mission. Then his voice, strained, rising, edged with panic. I do not care what the coordinates say. We have enemy contact in that sector. Fire the mission, now! Then my voice again, firmer this time. Sir, I am confirming Bravo Unit is at grid November 7-3. This is blue on blue. Then his voice, shouting now, all control gone. I gave you an order, Lieutenant. Execute the fire mission, or I will have you relieved. And then, after a long pause, the sound of me relaying the coordinates to the strike battery. And then, the sound of the radio calls from Bravo Unit as the shells started landing. The gap between his fake funeral voice and his real, cowardly command voice was devastating. The families heard it. The other officers heard it. The chaplain heard it. The Admiral froze, his face drained of color. For a moment, the entire chapel was silent, except for the audio playing over the speakers. And then, one of the mothers stood up. She turned toward the pulpit and screamed at him. You killed my son! The words echoed through the chapel. Other family members started standing. The military police surged forward, but the family's anger turned toward the pulpit first, buying me seconds to slip away. I kept my composure, turned, and walked out. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked at the same measured pace I had used in the maintenance corridor. I knew what would happen next. I knew the military police would come for me. I knew I would face charges for unauthorized access, for breaking classified protocols, for disrupting a military funeral. But I also knew that the truth was now out. The families had heard it. The other officers had heard it. And once the truth is heard, it cannot be unheard. The Admiral was relieved of command within 48 hours. The official statement said he was stepping down for personal reasons. But everyone knew what had really happened. The investigation into the friendly fire incident was reopened, this time with outside oversight. The charges against me were quietly dropped. No apology, no formal statement that I had been right all along, just a note in my file that the case had been closed due to lack of evidence. That is how the military saves face. It does not admit mistakes, it just stops pursuing them. The families of the 5 soldiers sent me letters. Not all of them, but enough. They thanked me. They told me that knowing the truth, even though it did not bring their loved ones back, gave them something they had not had before. Closure, clarity, the knowledge that their sons and husbands had not died because of some random mistake, but because someone in power had panicked and then tried to cover it up. And they told me that they were glad someone had the courage to make sure the truth came out, even when the system was built to bury it. I stayed in the Navy. Some people thought I should leave, that the institution had failed me and I owed it nothing. But I saw it differently. The institution did not fail me. One man failed me, and the system that let him classify evidence and silence witnesses failed me. But the uniform itself, the idea of service, the bond between people who put their lives on the line for each other, that did not fail. And I was not going to let one coward take that away from me. I learned something important that day in the chapel. Proof does not always come through official channels. Sometimes the only way to get the truth in front of the people who need to hear it is to go around the system entirely. The Admiral thought he could control the story by controlling access to the evidence. He thought that as long as the recording stayed classified, he was safe. But he forgot that classification only works if the people who matter never hear what is being hidden. And once the families heard his voice, once they heard the panic and the arrogance and the refusal to listen to a clear warning, no amount of official spin could save him. Discipline is not about following orders blindly. Discipline is about knowing what is right and having the control to act on it, even when the cost is high. I could have taken the plea deal. I could have accepted the dishonorable discharge and walked away. It would have been easier. It would have been safer. But it would have been wrong. And I was not willing to let 5 good soldiers be buried under a lie just because telling the truth was hard for someone with more rank than honor. The military is built on trust. Trust that the person next to you will do their job. Trust that the person giving orders knows what they are doing. Trust that when something goes wrong, the system will find the truth and hold the right people responsible. But trust only works if everyone in the chain honors it. And when someone at the top breaks that trust, when they use their rank to shift blame and bury evidence, the entire system is at risk. Because if junior officers cannot trust that the truth will protect them, then they will stop telling the truth. And once that happens, the military stops being a force built on discipline and becomes just another place where power protects power, and the people at the bottom get crushed. I think about those 5 soldiers often. I did not know all of them well, but I knew their call signs, I knew their voices, and I knew that they trusted the people in that comm center to do their jobs correctly. They trusted that if we saw danger, we would warn them. And we did. I did. But trust only goes so far when the person at the top refuses to listen. And that is the part that still makes me angry. Not that the Admiral made a mistake. People make mistakes under pressure. But that he knew he made a mistake, and instead of owning it, he tried to destroy someone else, to save himself. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. And choices have consequences. The Admiral never faced a court-martial. He was allowed to retire quietly. He lost his command. He lost his reputation among the people who knew what really happened, but he kept his pension and his rank. Some people say that is not justice, and maybe they are right. But justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes justice is about making sure the truth is known. The families know. The officers who were in that chapel know. And everyone who serves under people like him now has a reminder that rank does not make you untouchable. Proof does. And if you try to bury proof, someone, somewhere, will find a way to dig it up. If you have ever been in a situation where the system protected the wrong person, where you had to decide whether to stay silent or risk everything to tell the truth, I would love to hear your story. Drop a comment and let me know what you think justice should look like in cases like this. Because these stories matter. And the more we talk about them, the harder it becomes for people in power to hide behind classification and rank when they know they are in the wrong.